You're watching once again a YouTube video presentation of the University of Wyoming Center on Aging. I'm Scott Veach. I'm your host, and on this program we'll be discussing topics of interest for caregivers of loved ones with dementia. We hope that you will subscribe to the channel and you'll hit that thumbs up like button. Both of those actions help the channel to grow and allow us to reach more people. And if you'll tap that notification bell, you'll be alerted each time we upload a new program. And now, this is Once Again. Our guest today is Carol Taylor. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She specializes in geriatric care, based out of Jackson, Wyoming. All around great guy. Carol, thanks so much for being with us today. We're going to talk about communicating with loved ones who have dementia. And that can be a really challenging topic because I guess the desire or the temptation would be to throw up your hands and it's not going to work. But I think we need to start at where we communicate in general and how that differentiates from communicating with someone with dementia. Is that a good place to start?
That sounds great. So we all are beginning kind of from the same context. In communication, without dementia being present, we have expressive language skills that we use, and they're planned statements. They're generally fairly well thought out. We select our words. There's sequencing to what we say. There's a concentration that comes along with expressive language. Speech patterns, intonation, diction, volume, elocution, inflection, all have a role to play in our daily expressive language. We also use nonverbal cues at times, and they may enhance our conversation, though they're not essential in day-to-day conversation. We exchange thoughts and ideas, feelings, and responses are generally in the context of what the topic may be. Vocal production is generally in consonance with our emotional state, what we're talking about emotionally. So if we are distressed,
So communication doesn't have to be verbal.
No. Exactly right. Yeah. And often with our beloveds with dementia, it requires, not often, I'm going to say always, it requires a paradigm shift with us. They're doing the very best they can with what they have right now. But we are the ones that are invited to evaluate how we communicate with them. A couple of the areas that are of particular note, we tend to really value in our culture, in our society, the spoken word. Someone who has brain changes or a neurodegenerative process happening does not necessarily hold on to the words in the way they used to, neither do they have the meaning they once did. Again, we are the ones that need to shift. Can I communicate if I can't use words? I'm not saying don't use words, but don't rely on that to be the mode of most successful communication.
I heard many years ago someone say that when you're with a loved one who has dementia, that it's impossible for them to live in our world. They just can't do it. They don't have the skills, the abilities. So therefore, it becomes imperative on us to live in their world. Is that what we're talking about here?
That's exactly what we're talking about. And I will often say, try as much as you can to see through the eyes and ears of dementia. It's a very, very different world. And we begin by making assumptions that it's similar to our world, but maybe just a little slower, or maybe just can be a little bit more confusing. That's not the case. As the Velcro wears thin as the cognitive processes fail us with dementia, progressive dementia. There tends to be, I've learned this from my beloved elders over a lot of years, but there tends to be an emotional opening. And that is how one with moderate plus dementia experiences their environment. It's feeling. Does it feel safe? Does it feel scary? Does it feel uncertain? And those with dementia are reading all the signs. They're hypervigilant to the non-spoken types of relating.
And talking about that, it seems to me then that as a person with dementia progresses through that illness, their communication abilities change. So
Absolutely.
how do we know where they are on the timeline, and how do we know what's going to work? Is it all trial and error or what?
Much of it is trial and error. And one thing I really encourage my dear families to do is give something a try. If it doesn't work in terms of communication, give something a try. If it seems not to work or falls flat, wait for a couple hours, and often it's a brand new day and you can try it again. There's many influences that happen when we're talking and trying to communicate, not talk necessarily, with someone with dementia. Often there is background noise, there's overstimulation. And as much as we love to have soft jazz playing in the background, that's a distraction for someone with dementia. They are putting all of their resources, everything they have, into trying to catch what it is that they're supposed to be doing at the time. And because the words, our words, don't necessarily resonate with them, often we will use nonverbal communication techniques, a touch, hand over. If you want your loved one perhaps to look at a picture or a magazine, yes, you can hand it to them, but empower them and put your hand over theirs and say, let's try this together. And they pick up a picture and put it on their lap, and then they can look at that for a while. So we're only bound by our lack of creativity sometimes, I think. There's not really right and wrong. So in a way, trial and error, I guess that's accurate, but stay awake, stay present, take notes along the way with your loved one, and then build on what works.
I've heard you give this presentation before, and one of the things that you talked about was being able to get their attention. And that means many times getting right down in front of them, getting in their eyesight, because someone with dementia, I've heard you say, that vision begins to tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and number one, I mean, think about life in general. If you're trying to communicate or convey information to someone, you first of all have to get their attention, right? And so how can we refocus someone that has dementia and may not be terribly responsive to input? Well, we can do that in many ways. If it's someone we know well, we can begin by speaking to them before we touch them, before we move in, before we do much of anything. Often people with dementia have this overdeveloped startle response because they're not sure what's happening next. And we don't need to trigger that. So talking to someone and then always getting down to eye level, because it's quite intimidating. How does it feel to the person with dementia? Somebody standing over them, that can feel intimidated. It doesn't feel like we're together, we're on the same wavelength. And so those are the kinds of adjustments that we, first of all, need to be aware of and sensitive to, and then move in that direction. Absolutely. Often touch is a wonderful way to communicate with someone with dementia. If someone has, if you know someone that this person you love, they like to have their hand held or their hand rubbed or their face touched or their hair stroked. do those kinds of things. Those are all vital communication opportunities, and we just change the way we do it.
Can those work all the way through the timeline of the person at the beginning of dementia to the end of
Often they
dementia?
do, and then we go back to, they can work just fine for the loved one with dementia based on what our expectations are. It's about us.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So if this is one of my all-time least favorites, but it happens a lot. People will say to me, you know, I don't really go visit her that much anymore. She doesn't even know who I am. And my response to that is varied, but it always sounds like fingernails on chalkboard to me. Why do you say she doesn't know who you are? Well, she doesn't know my name. Okay, so that's a performance thing. That's their expectation, that someone knows them if they say their name. This is not unique. I hear this pervasively, and I say, but if you are in front of your mother and you have her attention and you are making eye contact and you're communicating non-verbally with her, does she look at you? Does she stay with you? Sometimes is there a slight smile? Oh, yeah, but she hasn't said my name in a long time. See what I mean about expectations?
Absolutely.
That's
Mhm.
yeah. And that's, first of all, it's not fair because the older person, someone
Right.
said that
Yeah.
to me about my mom during the end stages of her vascular dementia. And they said to me, do you think she knows you? And I said, of course she knows me. I am of her body.
Mhm.
Does she know that I am her eldest of two daughters, and I live in Jackson, and I do this and I do that? No. But does she know me? Of course she knows me.
Right. Right.
One
We're
girl's
talking.
opinion.
There you go. We're talking with Carol Taylor, who is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in geriatric care. And we're talking about communication strategies for loved ones with dementia. We hope that if you like this program, that you will subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up, like button. Both of those actions will help our channel grow and allow us to reach more people. And if you'll tap that notification bell, then that way you'll be alerted every time that we upload a new video. Boy, it can seem so daunting. Where's a good starting point? Where do you direct people to begin to try and communicate with your loved one?
Right. So one of the things I often recommend is to perhaps have a speech and language pathologist or an occupational therapist come in and gently assess and evaluate your loved one. Now, people say, yeah, she's not talking because of a speech impediment. I understand that. However, speech and language pathologists are often very well versed in what we call cognitive rehab. And so they can not turn the tide and reverse things, but they can assess with the skills they have and the experience what strengths still remain with your loved one and where are some of the rocky spots that would be best to steer clear from, because we probably won't have the success we want for both the loved one and ourselves. Occupational therapy is, well, I could go on, you know, I want to do TV commercials for occupational therapists.
Yeah.
They're just extraordinary people. They see the world totally differently than we do. But for them to observe your loved one in their own environment, they can have tremendous insights about perhaps your loved one refuses to go from one room to the next. And none of that makes sense to anybody in the family. You've talked to the doctor says, maybe get her eyes checked. I don't know, maybe whatever. Well, an OT would look at that and they would say, now, where doesn't she want to go? She doesn't want to go from this room to the next room. And the next room is the kitchen, and she loves being in the kitchen. And the OT may look down at the floor and say, yeah, the kitchen floor is much, much darker than the dining room carpeting. That darkness can look like a hole to your loved one, and they will not cross over onto a dark area because it's frightening. It looks like a hole. They think they're going to drop into it. Nothing we say can make a difference in their perception, but it really helps us a lot to know that. And maybe what we can do is put a long, bright colored runner across that area. We had years ago an old gentleman in Pinedale. Oh my goodness, he was great. But he would wander into the different halls of the care facility, and we just couldn't have that. And then he'd muck around in everybody's stuff. And so we came up with this fabulous idea. It's one of the ranch girls down that worked at the Sublet Center at the time. And we put bright yellow tape, 4 rows of that at the beginning of the hallway, and it looked like a cattle guard. He wasn't going to cross the cattle guard. You have to get into their world, how they see the world, how our loved ones can relate. Just off the cuff examples, but
And that's the value of having speech therapist, occupational therapist come in
absolutely
and do an assessment as well. You know, we've just touched the surface here, and we have a lot more to cover. So we're going to go conclude this part 1, and we're going to come back and do another part 2, and we're going to talk more about what you just said, getting into their world. So thank you, Carol, for this first part.
Thank you.
And we're going to come back, and our next segment, we invite you to stay tuned, and we'll be talking more about this subject. You've been watching once again a YouTube video presentation of the University of Wyoming Center on Aging. We hope, if you haven't done so already, that you'll subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up like button. Both of those actions help the channel to grow and allow us to reach more people. And if you'll tap that notification bell, you'll be alerted each time we upload a new video. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Scott Veach. We'll see you again next time.